recording begin. Okay, welcome everyone. Pleasant good evening, everyone, and welcome to the CBSE speaker series. This is our second year of offering our speaker series, and I just want to say how excited and happy we are to be offering the speaker series again. And with us this afternoon, this evening, we have an amazing panel. I just want to take a minute to say thanks to the panelists from last year. And I want to go on record for starting the series and the amazing opportunities for learning, for Q&A, for connections. What we love here at the CBSE is that research and praxis intersects, and we get to listen to the theory and the stories behind that, but we also get to meet people, to connect to people. We also get to build our network in an amazing way, and that is something that I know is one of the standout piece here at the CBSE. So I want to say a very special welcome to everyone. My name is Andrew B. Campbell, aka DR.ABC, and I am the director for the Center for Black Studies in Education here at OISE, also an assistant professor in racial justice in teacher education in the Department of Curriculum, Teaching, and Learning. We're going to begin with our acknowledgement, and then we're going to get right into it. So at this time, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get into it. So thank you so much again, everyone, for being here. I want to, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to operate on this land. At this time, I'm going to be inviting the GA, graduate assistant, the past GA for the CBSE, and the present GA for the Black Future Educators Pathway, Mohammed, who will be doing the ancestral acknowledgement.
Thank you. We acknowledge the Indigenous Africans who were forcibly removed from their native lands and dispersed across the New World. This involuntary migration heavily contributed to the movement of African-descended people across the African diaspora to places like Canada. As students and learners, we deem it highly necessary to think deeper and examine the processes that led to the disposition of Indigenous people on this land and settler colonialism, stolen people on stolen land. In entering a conversation about anti-Black racism, it is important to center the humanity of Black children and Black families and to examine systems such as the education system that act upon them. And that was sourced by Natasha Henry Dixon.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. We're going to stop sharing. Before we get into it, I'm going to remove the pin from both myself and from Mohammed. And I want everyone, if you wish, we are being recorded. If you wish to come on screen, you can come on screen and do that. But I also want everyone to say welcome in the chat. Go ahead in the chat and say welcome. I see a lot of persons. I see our past director for the TDSB, Colleen Russell here, who is also an amazing faculty advisor in the BFEP program here and on the advisory council of the CBSE. So thank you so much, Director, for being here. I see grad students. I see other grad students. And for those grad students who are new, this is your first event in the space. I want you to know how important this space is for you. Today we were going through our graduate student list and the number of persons who have participated and the number of persons who have benefited from this space. This is what this space is for us to grow in academic ways, in connections, in community, and in so many other ways. And so I want you to take a minute. I would love for everyone, I want to make this for the recording, that people will take a minute to visit the CBSE website. I want to just do something quickly because it's important when we send out these recordings that people understand And thank you so much. I see all the good stuff inside the box. I want to take a minute to share with you the CBSE website. I want you to take to be intentional about adding this to your list of places to hang out and to go check what's going on. By the way, you're seeing last year's series. And I see Professor Linda Ifeniyu, who was one of our amazing speakers, Dr. Marie Green, Professor Joki Wan, also, like I said, Dr. Kashka Watson, Dr. Stephanie Farron, and Dr. Key Alexander, who just made those two events so very special. And I know you are in for a treat. I want you to visit the website, visit our page, look about our CBSE, connect to the professors. I have had people asking me about the black professors. The list of the black professors in OISE, they are listed there, the OISE Black Faculty Caucus. Also about our, this background you can see is from our summer summit. Also our upcoming events. And if you know anything about our upcoming events, you know one of our signature event is our monthly research faculty gathering. We just had Professor Dr. Mary Green, and if you know last year, it was started by Professor Ann Lopez, who was the person who launched it, who did the first speaking in October, and we'll be having Professor Ann Lopez again for that session that I personally know how much we benefited from, how much we learned from you, Professor Lopez. And so it's going to be in December the 2nd to be exact, in-house, and we serve an amazing meal. With that being said, we're gonna introduce and welcome, and they will introduce themselves, but we're gonna welcome our first speaker in our series. We have 4 speakers this evening. We're gonna start with Tanita Monroe. We're gonna move on to John Costello, then Dr. John. We're going to move on to Dr. Natasha Bruford, and then we're going to anchor this evening with just amazing work from Professor Ann Lopez. So at this time, I want you to welcome Tanita Monroe, the newly minted Dr. Monroe. Put your hands together. Send up the love, everybody. Please do that. Go ahead, Tanita. Over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm grateful to be here and also here as a surprise with one of my students. I see you, Dr. Monroe, Grace Camille in the chat. So just give me a minute so I can set up to start. Okay. Right. So once again, welcome. Thanks for having me here, Dr. Campbell, and to my other colleagues who will be presenting this evening. My research presentation today is on research as resistance, Black youth shaping schools and community. And before I begin, I want to share how I come to this work. Because for me, research has not been just about theory. It's about how life, community, and my responsibility embodies how I lead, how I practice, right? So I come to this work as a Black woman, scholar, educator who has seen how systems talk back to Black youth without truly listening to what they have to say, and how data is collected on our communities while our brilliance and truth remains unseen. So my entry into research as resistance is rooted in tension, in knowing that research has often been used as a tool of surveillance and deficit, yet believing deeply, deeply that it can be transformed into practice of care, accountability, and liberation. So Black feminist thought also gave me what the language I already knew, right? So that knowledge is embodied, communal, and political. And through my work at the Center of Excellence for Black Students Achievement at TDSB, and also my community work, I've witnessed what happens when those most written about are rarely heard and never become authors or architects of their own stories. So when I speak of research as resistance, I'm not describing a framework. I am describing a practice of freedom grounded in love, creativity, and collective power. Research not on communities, but with and for them, and where the process itself becomes an act of transformation. So when I position this question that you're seeing, why research as resistance, I'm speaking to the idea of inquiry itself, that it can be an act of liberation. So as Alana Lentin reminds us, there is no such thing as a neutral research, only research that reveals or conceals power. So through a Black feminist and Afrocentric lens, research becomes what Venus Evans Winters calls care in action, right? It's relational, there's reciprocity, and we have to be accountable. And we also have to ground ourselves in the belief that the process is the work, right? So it asks us to consider, who do we listen to? Who do we center? How do we remain accountable to those whose stories are entrusted to us to hold tight, to hold to our chests, right? So in our work with Black youth, transformation for me begins by asking different questions, right? Questions rooted in justice, healing, and self-definition. So research as resistance is not about neutrality. It's about refusal, responsibility, reclaiming knowledge as a collective right. So to decolonize research means to unlearn neutrality, to make visible how power operates in the production of knowledge, right? So in education, K-12 spaces, Black youth are constantly talked about in policy, in research, in practice, but rarely invited to the table. They're the focus of data, but not the authors of change. Decolonizing research challenges that pattern. It's not about inclusion for its own sake. It's about redistributing power and treating Black youth as co-theorists and knowledge producers, not passive participants. And that's where the Black feminist and Afrocentric lens becomes essential, because these traditions don't just question power, they reimagine knowledge itself. They teach us that care, spirituality, community are not peripheral to research, they are methods. So when we root our research in Afrocentric and Black feminist lens, we're naming the how we know, and it is just as important as the what we know. Traditional Eurocentric approaches claim neutrality, yet they've often erased the lived realities of Black peoples and communities whose experiences normally don't fit the dominant narrative. So drawing on thinkers like Dr. Wan, this framework reminds us that knowledge is situated, shaped by identity, history, and community. It values lived experience as theory and voice as resistance, holding space for both pain and possibility, for the healing, the creativity, and the care that sustain us as a community. So the Afrocentric worldview for me deepens this by centering interconnectedness, ancestral wisdom, and collective positioning of research as both spiritual, ethical, and also communal work. And then it brings us to the lens of, why Sophia is here, one of my students, around youth participatory action research, right? So we move from studying the systems to transforming them, co-creating knowledge with students that repairs, reimagine, and reclaims. So a bit about YPAR. It put principles of decolonizing research into motion, actually. It's a process where young people lead inquiry, they identify issues that matter to them, designing questions, gathering data, and taking collective action. So YPAR moves through cycles of research, reflection, change, where the goal isn't just about producing knowledge, but to use it as transformation. It's also an anti-oppressive approach because it redistributes power. Adults are not the expert, and youth are not the subject, and that is really critical. They are co-researchers, partners in meaning making and action. So YPAR continues to value community, spirituality, creativity, and care, as valid forms of knowing. And that speaks to the Black feminist and Afrocentric epistemologies, right? It turns research from an extractive process into a practice of liberation and self-definition. So in this way, YPAR is both a method and a movement for the young people, a way for Black youth to theorize, resist, and reimagine education on their own terms. And that is really critical as well. And to bring us this work to life, I'd like to now invite Sophia Barnett. She's an alumni for the Black Student Summer Leadership Program that is held out of the Center of Excellence. And she's also a fabulous junior researcher to share a case example of the work in action.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Sophia Barnett and I graduated from Newton Brook Secondary School last June. And I'm at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, where I'm studying media production with a French minor. So I've been a part of the BSSLP, which is the Black Student Summer Leadership Program, for 2 years now. And I started off with my first research for my first year about Black representation in media. And I enjoyed the BSSLP so much that I wanted to come back this summer. And I had the chance to be a peer mentor and work alongside my peers and university mentors on our project called Coded in Culture. So AI is a new tool that had the purpose of aiding, but now we see that it's turning into a tool of overdependency. And this is why we created this project to explore. So in this project, we explored a big question, which was, what does the rise of AI mean for Black students, for how we learn, how we're seen, and how we belong in schools? Our major research question that we looked to explore was, what are the impacts of AI tools on the academic and socio-emotional well-being of Black high school students aged 14 to 18 in the TDSB? So as you can see here, this is the cover of our lit review on the slide. So we developed this during the spring session, breaking down topics of ethical concerns, data equity, data security, and future implications of how AI will look like and should look like in the TDSB. In using inquiry circles and podcasting as a research method, we can often see how AI tools like automated grading systems or chatbots often can repeat the same kinds of bias that already exist in our education system. So some of these systems are trained on the data that can exclude or misrepresent Black students, and this can mean that they can make decisions that can feel unfair or inaccurate. We noticed during our survey and our focus groups that some participants mentioned that AI is safer than the classroom because people tend to judge, but technologies like AI does not judge based on how you look or sound. So there are also some dangers in trusting tools like AI, because if we start trusting AI tools rather than real humans, we can risk losing the creativity and connection that we humans need to develop. So as one of our peers said, if we're not part of the design, we're part of the data. And this means that if we're not helping build the technology, it's being built without us, and sometimes even to further degrade us. So our group then turned those insights into action. So for our recommendations, we called on AI literacy in schools, training for teachers on algorithmic bias, and real inclusion of Black youth for the tech design and decision-making in the school. As scholar Ruha Benjamin reminds us, quote, "Who codes counts, who codes controls." So when Black youth study AI, they're not just analyzing bias, we're reprogramming justice and taking authorship over technologies that are going to be shaping our future. So that was a little introduction of our project Coded in Culture, and we explored what AI means for Black students' learning, identity, and creativity. But without community, these projects would not be possible. They're part of a much larger movement we've built through the Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement. At the center, we created a youth participatory action research ecosystem, and this is a space that lives at the intersection of research, creativity, and community. Every year, more than 100 Black students from across the TDSB join the Black Student Summer Leadership Program to participate in meaningful research that associates with justice in the Black community, supported by graduation coaches, researchers, educators, and community partners. Together, we will explore questions about representation, belonging, joy, and well-being through our creative research pods, which is podcasting, storytelling, photo voice, musicology, and action research. Each of the pods becomes its own community of practice where students connect learning to lived experience and turn creativity into knowledge. So in musicology, we will explore how music becomes a language of protest, healing, and joy. In the podcast pod, we will use podcasting as a research method, and we turn our conversation into data, editing into analysis, and storytelling into theory. And in storytelling and photo voice, we capture the identity and resistance through images and narrative, showing that creativity itself is a valid methodology. So now Dr. Monroe will be playing a clip of our podcast called Coded in Culture.
Coded in Culture. We chose a different way to share our research, which is why you're listening here to our research as a podcast instead of a more traditional method. As Black students, our research has an Afrocentric focus. Part of Afrocentricity is the practice of sharing oral traditions. All of us can go through our ancestral history and find traditions of sharing stories from generation to generation. So, we thought that we'd merge the traditional with the modern and use a podcast to orally share our research with you.
This also means our research is more accessible and isn't held up somewhere where young people can't get a hold of it. We did this for youth, alongside youth. Thank you, Dr. Monroe. So what makes our research very powerful is that it blurs the line between research and artistry. We don't just study systems here, we study with and through our communities using real life people to be able to talk to us and share their experience. Here, the focus is always on process over product, reflection, collaboration, and collective growth. As one of my peers said so perfectly, we study the system not to be studied by it. Students will leave this program not only as researchers, but as critical thinkers, cultural producers, and community leaders who understand that our stories are data and our creativity is methodology. This is research that doesn't just analyze, it heals, it creates, and it transforms. I want to say thank you to Dr. Monroe for letting me join and share my thoughts.
All right, thank you, Sophia. So what I witnessed in this work was belonging. Students seeing themselves not as subjects of study, but as theorists, as Sophia echoed, right? You hear students telling you, I see myself differently. I am able to share my stories or share the stories of my family or my community. I also witnessed like resistance and redefinition, right? Youth using rhythm, photography, and dialogue to reclaim stories of Blackness that schools often frame through deficit lenses. And then there is the Black joy and the healing, right? And not just outcomes, but as methods of survival. In system marked by anti-Blackness, joy itself becomes a form of resistance for the young people. Across these spaces, voice become visibility. Youth moved from being studied by systems to studying the systems, naming how race, policy, belonging shape their lives. And another student told me that, we are the data theory and the future, right? And that stuck with me. On screen, you're seeing magazines created by these same youth researchers, including Sophia here, who just shared her story. These aren't products of a program, they're evidence of transformation, turning voice into vision into change. And through this lens of creation and care, we begin to see what I call an interpretation through a resistance lens, right? Where youth can transform critique into theory and theory into possibility. And it is through a resistance lens that we see how youth move from critique to creation, right? So they're transforming research into frameworks of care, as I shared earlier, identity and liberation. Their work doesn't just name what's wrong, It imagines what's possible. So they're not sitting in the deficit. For these young researchers, resistance isn't only refusal, it's creation. It's the act of building new ways of learning and belonging in spaces that haven't always seen their brilliance. Their lived experiences become both data and theory, what Patricia Hill Collins calls, knowledge as praxis, right? Knowledge born from the everyday labor of survival, Black joy, and imagination. And as I often say, Black youth are not waiting to be empowered. They are already building new worlds. Our task is to listen, follow, and make space for that becoming. And to let us change how we do research, right? How we love and how we show up for Black students in K-12 spaces and, at the community at large. So that reflection brings us to what comes next, the lessons, the tensions, and possibilities that shape research as resistance. So every project each year, they're always coming with something brand new, these young people, great ideas, and how to shape their school environment, right? So it comes with its own tensions, right? Because we're trying to do something radically different, sometimes in a system built for control, right? Power dynamics are always present, even in co-created spaces. Adult researchers hold authority. The challenge is to share power, to guide without directing, to mentor without imposing. Time is another tension. Warpar takes time to build trust, to listen, to reflect, but justice-centered work moves at the speed of care and not compliance, right? There's also ethics that demand reflection. We want to amplify youth voice, but we must also protect them, ensuring agency when their stories challenge the very systems they inhabit. And then there is sustainability, and that matters a lot when projects and relationships should not. We continue to build mentorship and community beyond the research itself. And through it all, we practice reflexivity, naming our positions and the things that we aren't seeing, the unseen, right? And as C. Haywood often reminds us, accountability is not a checklist, it's a relationship, right? So that's what keeps this work grounded, not perfection, but presence, care, and collective reflection. And it's that reflection that calls us to reimagine and resist together. That brings us to our final thought. So before we close, I just want to pause to reflect, reimagine, and resist together. And so this moment reminds us why we do the work and who we do it for. Research is never just about data, as been echoed throughout my presentation. It's about relationship, it's about care, the courage to tell the truth. Youth are not empty vessels to be filled, but theorists of their own lives. Our role is to listen deeply, create spaces where their knowledge can flourish, and unlearn the habits of control that research often reproduces. And we must remember that liberation is collective. Transformation doesn't live in reports. It lives in relationships. It lives in communities and the everyday creative acts of resistance that sustain us. So I leave you with this. What would it mean to reimagine research as relationship? How might youth-led inquiry reshape your work? And as you know, there is Arundhati Roy who talks about another world is not only possible, she's on her way. And they're the future, the young people. So that world is ready for us to be imagined by the youth we serve. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sophia to close us out.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm back. So I just wanted to say that the BSSLP for me was just a life-changing experience because I'm someone who is very shy. Like I will get very nervous like speaking in front of people. Even on Zoom, I just get nervous. But this allowed me to be able to improve my public speaking skills. Still going to be taking a little bit of work, but I feel that I can go to people that I can trust in this space. So Miss Monroe, Miss Gordon, Miss Annette. I feel that I can just have a safe space to be myself. I learned how to do research. I learned about primary and secondary research methods. So now if I ever have to do a research project in school, I'll be more prepared. And I realized that It's not just taking research from other people, but we can conduct our own research and get student experiences, shining light on Black experiences, and also just being open to hear what everybody has to say. So that's what I want to say. Thanks.
And that's it for us.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You see the comments, you see the feedback, you see that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Something you said resonated with me, Tanitia, about moving from studying the system to co-creating them. There are a lot of PhD, master's students in the audience, persons who are looking to come to OISE, persons who are looking to study. I personally have gotten so many conversations and requests for conversations. And often I say to people, you miss out on the opportunities, the learning opportunities like this. Something I want to highlight, when you said that, I saw then in action a podcast and 2 copies of a magazine. I want to say to the audience, when we talk about producing, taking up space in the internet, when we blame AI for having certain images, it's because we don't take up the space. And I want to tell you, take up the space. So our podcast is out there with Sophia's voice and Sophia's name and Sophia's image. There is a magazine, there is writing. That is how you produce. And that is how you come alive, like I am feeling, and I see Tanita is feeling, because the work is just not in paper. The work is alive out there. So I want to thank you, Dr. Monroe. I'm going to sit between Tanita and Dr. Monroe for bringing your work and making it alive and making it real. And Sophia, something you said at the end, I want to also highlight, because that's what I do as a moderator. You didn't talk in your closing about your research or where you're doing now in university. You talked about how research helped you with your social skills and shyness and presentation skills. And that is the power of research. So when I say to people, you are invited to speak, to participate, this is how you grow and ground yourself. I'm going to make sure I show this video to a number of persons who I keep saying, you cannot be great in your bedroom alone. You know what I say that? You can't just be great by going home and lock the door and go lie down. You have to participate, engage, and research is alive in community and accessible. We're going to move on from this, Tanita, but I'm going to ask you one question for you to elaborate on something. You have 1 minute to elaborate on this. There's something you said that resonated with me so much, and I need you to just take a minute. You said research as a practice of liberation and self-definition. Tell me more. 1 more minute. I need to hear something more. It's so good. I need something more. I'm selfish. I want something more. Research as liberation, the practice of liberation and self-definition. Talk to me. A minute.
I think I can speak from my perspective. I think my personal will always be my political. I think I am accountable to my community. I am accountable to all the students, the Black students that I engage with. And I will always say, when we see these data sets and these percentages, it belongs to a student, it belongs to a family, right? And they all have a story. And that's the lens that I operate from. And I think, my minute is up, but I had to do it from my perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just want to take this opportunity to big up Sarah, one of your past students who's been with us at the Black Student Summer Leadership Program and guided the work that Sophia and her colleagues did. So much love to you, Sophia.
Thank you.
Sarah.
This is a connection. This is how we build
Community.
This is how we build community. Before we call our next speaker, this is why I love my work. I keep on telling people I love what I do. I get to do what I love, and I know it's a blessing. I want to take a minute to big you up also. For those of you who don't know, in my new book, Active Break Conversation, Dr. Monroe is chapter 8. writing about what you live and what you breathe and what you do. And chapter 8 is cultivating, sustaining, protecting, and celebrating joy in our classrooms. That is, as we say back home, a wicked chapter. And jump into it. Thank you so much, Dr. Monroe. Thank you so much. We're going to move right along, and we're going to be inviting also a new doctor, Dr. John Costello, who I had the pleasure of being in community with just this past summer in Ghana on that amazing trip hosted by a professor here at OISE, Professor Nana George Day. And I got to learn about his research, and that's why for me I was intentional and targeted to say I want to invite John to share a little bit, 20 minutes, but a little bit about his research, because it is so powerful and it's so, for me, impactful to the conversation we're having. So John, it's over to you.
All right, good evening, everyone. So I'm just hoping that this technology does work. If it does not, we'll figure it out. I'm sure I'll figure this out. Alrighty, I'm just going to go to the presenter view, and I'm just hoping that everything goes well.
And while John is finding his slide and opening a slide, I just want to say welcome to our international attendees. I see you. I see people from other countries in the space. And I just want to say welcome to OISE. Welcome to the CBSE, the Center for Black Studies in Education. We see your slide, Dr. John. Over to you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Everyone can hear me okay? I'm sure, because I can't see anyone.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your slide very well.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. I'm just going to go forward. Just tell me if you can see this. Can you see speaker notes right now?
No speaker notes, just your slide.
Okay,
Good to go.
perfect. All right,
Awesome.
so good evening, everyone. I would like to really acknowledge DR.ABC, my friend, my colleague, scholar warrior, and my brother. I believe I can call you my brother as well. And I called him my big brother. He really looked out for me a lot in Ghana. I really appreciate that. Dr. Lopez, to Tanitia, who's here, my friend, my sister. We did many coursework together during our PhD studies. So yes, I am a newly minted doctor. I passed and I say this with utmost respect and humility. I did my dissertation defense this past March, and it's a very high honor that it was received and accepted as it stands. And to me, that's a huge accomplishment. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but now I do realize what it means. So I really do appreciate that, and the ancestors for giving me the knowledge that I do have and the passion to do this work. So I'm just going to focus on my research, which is decolonizing Black masculinity. And this is just a beginning of many years of research. And I'm going to just borrow from Dr. Monroe. I came to this research after experiencing very overt anti-Black racism in an elevator in Toronto. And at the time, this mom and her daughter was in the elevator, and I was in the elevator for about, I would say maybe 10 or 15 seconds. And she ran into the corner and she just held on to her daughter, almost smothering her. And I did write that in my dissertation as well. And I realized it was anti-Black racism because for some unknown reason, she thought the Black beast, the Black monster had entered into her sacred space and she was going to be somehow be assaulted or harmed. And just coming out of that experience, it was quite traumatizing. And I said to myself, I need to write about this. And that's how I positioned myself in the research to understand how do we decolonize Black masculinity. And to that, contemporary men of color face a unique challenge. They dwell in a place where it's virtually impossible to live up to socially constructed notions of masculinity and sexuality. Stereotypes about Black men being hypersexual, hypermasculine, dangerous criminals are commonplace in the minds of many. Thus, an integral part of Black male identity formation often includes attempts to counter these conflicting and impossible definitions of manhood, as stated by Stolten and Spates. Throughout my dissertation, I used very, very powerful images, and these are one of the images just to really give the reader a sense of what Black men and boys encounter daily, because we are so visualized by the dominant. And I just want everyone to get a sense that this is what we encounter every day. In beginning this work, 8 images titled Hope, Struggle, Resistance, Power, metamorphosis, beauty, strength, and determined are presented and woven throughout my thesis with a brief caption that I wrote myself. So I literally reflected on each image. I wanted to give them life. Each image, it's two-dimensional, and there is no relationship between the reader and the image. So I thought of somehow providing the reader a bit of context and how the image speaks to me. As you are looking at these images, you might think about what can I say about these images? With this, we must move to decolonize Black masculinity by critiquing race and gendered colonial inscriptions of Black men and boys as well. The first image, hope, and the caption reads, at first glance, there's a sense of despair, but a closer look shows a readiness to connect to inner strength. With his knees bent, his arms firmly grasping his abdomen, and dreadlocks covering his face, there's a sense of inner calm, self-affirmation, and hope of a future entrusted to him by his ancestors. In chapter 1, I introduced the study. I had my research objectives, the questions, the problem of the study, and understanding hegemonic masculinity. My study examined decolonizing Black masculinity through the lived experiences and perspectives of cisgendered heterosexual African Caribbean men in the Greater Toronto Area. Black masculinity within the context of 2S plus LGBTQI community is also discussed briefly in the conclusion of the research. In the Western world, hegemonic masculinity is idealized within Eurocentric thought, which rewards whiteness and punishes Blackness. When speaking of and writing about Blackness, it is critical to engage in understanding Black masculinity framed within decolonial discourses. Historically, law enforcement and policing were created to ensure the safety of white aristocracy. In addition, with the maintenance of whiteness and white supremacy comes the lamenting of Black lives lost to police brutality and violence. Sadly, stereotypical images in the media are intended to criminalize, demonize, monstrify, and vilify Black men and boys, reminding us of the need to critique and disrupt negative representations of Blackness and decolonize Black masculinity. My research objective questions was, how is Black masculinity conceptualized when engaging with decolonization practice within African Caribbean contexts of men in Toronto? I'm Afro-Caribbean. My ancestry is Trinidad, but I am African because Africa was born in me. I was not born in Africa, but Africa was born in me. The learning objectives in my research seek to examine the significance of Black lives, of male lived experiences as counter-narratives to hegemonic constructions of Black masculinity, understand how images in the media, music, and popular culture contribute to shaping colonial perceptions of Black men in Toronto, and understanding how decolonizing Black masculinity affects positive learning outcomes in the classroom to empower African Caribbean males. The problems in my study that I've discovered, there have been very few attempts made to bring together Black masculinity and decolonization as two prominent scholarly areas of study. There's a lot of literature on Black masculinity as well as decolonization, but bringing them together, that was the gap or the problems in my research, to examine the complexity of African Caribbean manhood and maleness, especially within the GTA. This gap was addressed in my research. And I wanted to think about understanding hegemonic masculinity is to understand that its definitions are rooted in hegemonic patriarchal Eurocentric ideologies of maleness and manhood. In this next image, struggle. And here's the caption. Struggle depicts two Black men in a struggle with both faces hidden. One is reaching toward the light and one turns away from the light. Their strength is demonstrated as different muscle groups defines their silhouette. Is their struggle to disrupt societal confinement or an internal struggle for their humanity? This is the ongoing struggle in my research that many Black men, and I did interview 12 research participants, which we'll get to later on. In chapter 2, I did a literature review looking through the African Caribbean diaspora. I looked at colonialism, colonization, and coloniality using Walter Mignolo's research, decolonization, this idea of Blackness, and Black masculinity. When looking through the African Caribbean diaspora, a common misconception regarding Black and Indigenous peoples in the Caribbean is that it is fixed in homogeneous cultural identity. In understanding African Caribbean diaspora identity and the interconnectedness of Black masculinity, it is fundamental to establish the importance of ongoing decolonial practices to dismantle colonial structures that disrupted our timeline. When we look at colonialism, colonization, and coloniality, critiquing colonial persistence is needed because the colonial project to enslave Black men and Black boys produced meta-narratives which shackles the psyche to subvert the Black struggle against the fragmentation of Black human identity. That is our struggle. Decolonization, therefore, is an ongoing process. And like Tuck and Yang would say, it's not a metaphor. It has to be something that is worked into our daily lived experiences. It's ongoing, and we're critiquing the lingering effects. And again, Tuck and Yang reminds us of that. When we look at Blackness, and Black masculinity, through my research, I use the term Blackness to acknowledge and recognize the complexity of the Black experience, and more specifically, Black males. Having a comprehensive understanding of the saliency of race is pivotal to developing practical discursive processes that subvert colonial legacies within decolonization frameworks. What are we doing in the classroom? What are we saying? How are we now thinking about taking a decolonial stance and resistance? We look at resistance. The caption reads, "Locked in mortal combat, the two bodies are opposing each other. The irony is obvious. There's an obvious evidence that the smaller of the two bodies presents a greater challenge to the larger body, demonstrating resistance. The question is, who is resisting whom?" From there, I worked into my theoretical framework, theory as resistance, anti-colonialism and Black masculinity, anti-racism and Black masculinity, cultural representation, and stereotypes of Black men. When we think about theory as resistance, key objectives in my research sought to understand what does it mean to theorize Blackness as transformational actions to liberate us from ongoing oppressive colonial structures. For Day, theory is, however, not absent of a body. Theory is not without a certain historical lineage. Theory is then, it is that much needed relationship between the is and the ought. How do we actionize theory? As my previous colleague stated in her work, anti-colonialism and Black masculinity, the social construction of race was created in favor of whiteness as currency to dominate racialized communities and dehumanize Black men and boys. To that end, it is therefore necessary to engage in decolonizing Black masculinity using an anti-racist theoretical framework because Black men and boys experience daily encounters of racial violence, wherein their intersectional identities are constructed, deconstructed, reconstructed in the white imagination as hyper-aggressive, hypersexual, intellectually inferior, and needing to be policed. Anti-racism and Black masculinity, I use this theory because this theory speaks to the saliency of race as socially constructed, and it connects to that. When we think about cultural representation and stereotype, representation, when controlled by the dominant, can be a powerful tool of disenfranchisement, manipulation, and oppression. There's a convergence between anti-colonial and anti-racist theory. The two theoretical frameworks, they synthesize our understanding of the need for decolonizing Black masculinity because of ongoing colonial rhetoric, which defaults to barbarism, uncivility, criminality, hyperaggressive, hypersexuality, and vilification when speaking of Black men, as proposed by Kotosa, Banton, Day, Fanon, and many, many other scholars. I'm just looking at my time. When we think about Black masculinity, we're thinking about power. The caption reads, "He's bending towards the ground, looking at his reflection coming from the land. He is connected to the land, and his power emanating from his contorted body and fixed eyes, because our bodies are always contorted in the white imagination. His ancestral roadmap drawn in his braided hair calls us to consider his future as he contemplates his next move away from hegemonic colonial masculinity and moving towards decolonizing his Black masculinity. It's a self-reflective work as well, and it does involve the community. In methodology and design, the sampling process, I looked at the recruitment, ethical principles. I interviewed, like I said before, 12 participants, and there were not many challenges, and also my data analysis. With my sampling, participants were selected using a propulsive sampling strategy, which created opportunities for me to build meaningful relationships during the process of the study and beyond. And I do still have relationships with some of the research participants. I do reach out to them via email, Sometimes we're texting and having conversations. So as Dr. ABC said at the beginning, there's so many ways that we can build community and making those connections and to humanize the research, not just seeing our participant as a subject, but as a human being that we can continue these conversations. The sample size for my process consisted of 10. I used 12, but I only ended up researching on just 10 African Caribbean men ranging in age from their late 20s to their mid 60s. This provided me with a broad scope of narrative experience on Black masculinity. The interview process, they were emailed, a very secure email, and no one knew of each other. And for my data analysis, I utilize Kent Longer's step-by-step guide to coding and indexing the data I gathered from the interviews. One of my favorite chapters is this image that's coming up. This chapter is Metamorphosis, one of my favorite chapters and one of my favorite image. The caption reads, in this image, there's a sense of stripping away the layers of white supremacist logics, a type of metamorphosis of Blackness and Black masculinity. The stripping away is coming to a full understanding of Black consciousness. It's a refusal to accept hegemonic readings of Black masculinity, metamorphosis delinking from colonial ideologies, and being as a verb, just being human. In my data findings, I looked at Black male consciousness and Black masculinity, Black men, Black boys, their masculinity and schooling, my Black maleness and manhood, self-determination and resilience, white gaze, and Black masculinity. The research findings were coded into the following 5 themes: Black male consciousness, Black masculinity, as stated before. The theme of Black men and Black boys, their masculinity and schooling, were consistent throughout the interview as each participant frequently commented on their negative experiences in school. The theme of Black maleness and Black manhood came to fruition after examining the participants' response to questions 4, 5, and 6, and there were 12 research questions. Black men, Black boys, and their masculinity in schooling. Black students share their daily lived experience in their classes and speak of teachers' assumptions of low expectations. Inscriptions of the class clown, the underachiever, hyper-aggressive, hyper-masculine, hypersexual, and many more stereotypes that dominate the landscape of colonial educational spaces. These stereotypes were often linked to the influence of tropes embedded in popular culture and media, which continue to perpetuate the notion of the Black beast lurking in the shadows waiting to pounce on the sanctity of whiteness and ravish their innocence. When I think of self-determination and resilience, Black strength is contingent on rewriting personal narratives. Strength is connecting to our inner sanctum, this inner temple, this inner holy place I would think of, through ancestral ways of knowing. So we're thinking of Afrocentric epistemologies and ontologies and being. It is reclaiming of our African histories, which was disrupted by colonial violence. When we move from this idea of metamorphosis, then we can actually look at the beauty of Black masculinity. Despite all that transpired through the violence of colonization, dehumanization, and enslavement, there is still beauty beyond comprehension and explanation. His broadened shoulders, firm abdomen, and powerful thighs, all bequeathed to him through his ancestral elders, as he fixes his gaze towards an unimaginable future. Through centuries of repression, Blackness continues to thrive in many diasporic communities. The beauty of Black masculinity has numerous untold stories waiting and yet to be written. Through my research, I examined how images of Black men are constructed, deconstructed, formed, and reconstructed, eternally on Black men and boys, hence the reason for this image. Let's take a quick look at it. Destroy this mad boot. And then several decades later, you can see a basketball player and a model, Giselle, LeBron James. There's a huge similarity. It is reimagining Black masculinity to link from colonial readings, renderings, and representation of Black men. It calls for understanding that Black men are not the disfigured and voided human constructed in the white imagination. Black masculinity is multifaceted. It is rooted in Africanness and Blackness. Our re-imaging is seeing new futures apart from a European understanding of Blackness. The downside of seeing potential of seeing potential is often limited by people seeing only what's in front of them, the immediate, the now. This is not good enough. Futurist potential calls for a reawakening, a reimagining, a renewal, a resurgence of Africanness connecting to our ancestors. To my research, I also added new images. What do we now see with the Black man? This visual piece was created by me, a bit of a collage, as an alternative entry point. So what are the new entry points to decolonizing Black masculinity? In that white supremacist logic must deliberately position itself to see beyond what is seen in the imagination and begin to acknowledge, recognize, and celebrate the humanity of Black men and boys. These images show ambition, beauty, brilliance, compassion, depth, expectation, faith, hope, joy, kindness, love, and meditation, only to name a few. And these were all, that's what I saw. I would love to hear what you see when you look at these images. Black masculinity is filled with multi-layered and intersected narrative juxtaposed against a dominant colonial hegemony, which validates white patriarchy and vilifies Black men and boys. The refusal to acknowledge Black males and Black manhood apart from white hegemonic masculinity propagates colonial structures. To recognize Black masculinity rooted in Blackness is moving towards decolonization as new epistemologies, decolonization as new ontologies, all grounded and rooted in Africanness. When we've metamorphosized and when there's beauty, now there's strength, the caption reads, here we see resilience, a refusal to stay down. He's bracing himself with his hands and positioning himself to get up after being thrown down. There is a clear connection to his breath, the land which provides strength to overcome any oppression that threatens his Blackness. In chapter 7, there's a discussion, summary, and conclusion. I just want to go to the conclusion. In our decolonization practice and process, let us always remind Black men and boys that our village will always be there to affirm, celebrate, hold, and protect. While we have no control how we are seen through the eyes of the dominant, we must contest colonial narratives and contend for our own destinies, which was delivered to us through the anguish, hardship, and pain our ancestors endured to overcome and overcame. Let us hold fast to the legacy of our ancestors and remember freedom fighters, scholars, and thinkers such as James Baldwin, Omi K. Baba, Steve Biko, Frederick Douglass, Violet Desmond, W.E.B. Du Bois, Frantz Fanon, Stuart Hall, Bell Hooks, Martin Luther King Jr., Audre Lorde, Albert Memmi, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and Sylvia Wynter, and so many more. Professor Ann Lopez, George Day, Professor ABC, Dr. Tanichi Monroe. So much more through academic writings and through the unknown deeds not written in any academic journal or history books. Grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles. Let us enrich our lives with celebrations infused by their actions, generosity of spirit, tenacity of mind, and political words, spurring us to move from theory to action. Let our actions and words align with those of our ancestors and our resistive stance be firm to ensure our stories are told and our voices heard, ensuring our seats at the table and that the lives of Black men and boys matter. We have to be determined with that resolve. This image depicts a determined engagement of decolonization. There is a constant maneuvering of the Black masculine through time and space, to past, present, and future possibility of selfhood apart from oppressive colonial structures, which rewards whiteness and punishes Blackness. When we are determined, then we will definitely move towards emancipation. Emancipation is freeing ourselves from mental slavery. Bob Marley reminds us of that because only we ourselves can free our minds. This emancipation is understanding that colonization has and continues to inflict trauma on the Black psyche. The violence of colonization goes beyond the physical restraints of chains, the chains of colonization, although intended to commodify and reduce Black Africans to property to satisfy Europe's need for resources. Colonial chains entangle and wrap themselves around the minds of Black men and boys, positioning them as subaltern to white hegemony. It is about thinking about how do we now rebuild communities that celebrate Blackness and create new futures rooted in Africanness. And with that, I would love to say Asante Sana and Miigwech.
Thank you so much. Wow. Come on, put your hands together, everyone, for that. Powerful, John. And what I love is I'm going to say the silence in the room because I am in the room, but knowing there are so many doctoral students and master students online. I know we're good with time, so don't worry. We have two amazing next 20-minute slots coming up with Dr. Natasha Buford and, of course, anchoring it with Professor Ann Lopez. You have to hear all of this good stuff. But I'm going to take one question from the audience, just one. So I'm going to ask audience members if you want to raise your hand to ask a question of Dr. John about anything to do with his process, his methodology, because I can sense many of you taking that in. It's funny enough, I had a meeting today with three of my GAs as well, John, and today we talk about decolonization. We talk about a methodology. We have discussion on that. I know one of them, I think maybe one or two is in the room. So is there anyone who'd like to ask John a question? I'm going to give one audience member an opportunity to ask a question about method, about process, about something, about thinking, about organizing topics and subtopics. Who want that opportunity to ask a question? Go ahead and raise your hand so I could call on you. Anybody want to do that? We're shy, or are we just okay? Okay, let's take you, Dorcas. Go ahead, Dorcas. Go ahead, please.
I was late, so I kind of missed it, but it looked interesting though. When you talk about I think it was masculinity, black masculinity, was it? So, okay, my master in thesis, it's supposed to be about Canadian veterans and Canadian Armed Force. So I was wondering what kind of methodology did you use, and like Dr. ABC said, like what was the process? What was the and how did it affect your mental? Like, how did you cope with it? That's it.
I think I want to start with the final part of the question. I'm still coping because I'm a black male, so I do have these daily encounters, and it has affected my mental health because not in I don't want to say negative or positive because we're all in the mental health spectrum. So it has affected my mental health, and I find in doing this work, it continues to bring a lot of healing. And I think it's the stories. I I I was not, I thought I was alone in my struggle as a black male. And when I did the interview with these, you see, I'm getting goosebumps. It's still so fresh and it still resonates with me when I'm speaking of it. I get goosebumps and I tear up because I can still hear their voices. So to answer your question with methodology, I still hear their voices. Um, but I don't silence their voices. That's why I use those images I was using because I'm an artist and I wanted to make sure that those images can speak life, could bring life to their voice because you're just reading the dissertation, but I wanted the images to be part of the method. And with the method, I was also interviewing them. And there were moments when the questions were so difficult for them and I had to give them whether it be an hour or two. I just went based on what they preferred. And if I said, do you want us to stop right now and come back to it tomorrow? They said, that's okay. I can continue. I said, do you want us to just wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes? And they say, yes, I just need 5 minutes because you're talking about lived experiences and there's so much trauma that Black men are carrying. And it does take a village because now there are more connections to that village. So I'm feeling my brothers, I'm feeling my nephews, I'm feeling my cousins. So to answer your question, I think it's living the research, it's allowing the questions to permeate every fiber of your being. It's not just seeing them as a subject or an object, but being my brothers, and we are in the resistance fight. So to answer your question, I think it's you do have to protect your mental health because you will be interviewing participants and they will be sharing your stories. And these stories are very sacred. And none of this, I've never shared any of the stories. That's why I really appreciate my wife for that. She'd never ever ask about it because some of the interviews were done during COVID. So I did, and she would never ask, and they were stored very secretly, and they still are. So I think protecting your heart, but opening up your heart, it's a bit of a gray area that you're in at the same time. You have to protect your heart, but you still have to still open your heart to feel their experiences. And you need to check in with yourself as well because your research participants, they're going to be raw. So it did affect my mental health. I became stronger, better, wiser, more sensitive,
Yeah.
more attentive to my students. I'm
Yes.
reading their body language. I see them smiling, but I can see that you're not actually smiling. So it does affect your mental health.
Yes.
Um, but it's that and that's important. And I think if we were to walk away and say, "Oh, my mental health was not affected," then you need to reconsider your research because it will be affected. It will have an affect. There will be an affect, and there will be an effect. And I
Yes.
think you have to be able to decide or define what's the affect to that and what's the effect of that of the interview. I know I'm saying a lot to you, so I
No.
hope that helps.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much. And I think what for me, and I hope everybody's getting, and those who will be watching this video months to come, is we said it. We've said it. I'm sure you have sat in class and you've heard it, and some of us believe it and some of us don't. Doing research is different from just doing research, and that's why we have the quality of research you see happening, and that's why we have kind of research as one of our first speakers said, that is empowering research that move from the theory and to come alive. And so I want to encourage you all as current and future, and myself of course, as current and future researchers, as we invite Dr. Natasha Buford in the space, is to ensure that when you do research, you engage in the research and it becomes the work that you are doing. It becomes intentional. And the passion from that, the depth from that, the caring from that, as John said, the learning from that, you take into other spaces, and that's where you bloom and you blossom, and your research don't come to be a one done slap put on in a paper and it never comes alive. Many of us are still experiencing the power of our research 10, 15 years after we have done the research. So I want you to not be lazy in doing your research, be intentional. And as talking about being intentional, I am so happy to welcome Dr. Natasha Buford here, one of OIS's sessional who taught along with me in one course, anti-discrim, and then your book. Just seen your book, Black Woman, I Love You. Black Woman, it's over to you. Talk to us about that book. Go ahead, and your work. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone. My name is Dr. Natasha Burford. Like Dr. ABC said, I did my PhD at U of T in OISE and graduated in 2020 and have started teaching in the OISE department. So I'm really excited about that. I recently published my dissertation with Routledge Publishing, and so my book, I did not have a chance to do any slides. So my sincere apologies. I'm actually a little bit under the weather, so it probably won't be a full 20 minutes, but I'm definitely open to taking questions. And so my book is actually called Black Girlhood and Identity in Canadian Elementary Schools, a feminist perspective on voice, agency, and visibility. And so to give you a little background of how my research came to be, so just in terms of my positionality, obviously as a Black female of Caribbean descent, growing up in Canadian schools. So thank you. So my experience being in Canadian schools, specifically growing up in Toronto, and some of you may have heard my story before, so I won't, labor it too much, but understanding that I was definitely not, like, I didn't know who I was going to school. I went to a predominantly white school in Toronto, and wanted to be like my friends, wanted just to fit in the spaces that I was in. So my dissertation was actually called Black Canadian Women, White Canadian Schools. That's what I called my dissertation. And it wasn't until I came to OISE to do my master's. So I'm also a teacher. And so I stepped away from teaching for a while. I had been teaching for about 15 years in the TDSB. I stepped away from teaching and I came back to OISE to do not back to OISE, but came to OISE to do my master's. And I was sitting in Professor Day's class. and I was learning about Frantz Fanon. And I remember reading Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask. And I realized at that moment in the class that I was the boy who was singing the patriotic songs and really not knowing who I was. Because as you know, for the many of you who have been to Canadian schools, that is what we're taught. Black children are not celebrated. And I'm very honored to hear Dr. Monroe's presentation and also Dr. Castello's presentation, because I think mine is sort of a combination of both in terms of how we're presented as Black children in the Canadian school system. And so speaking as a child, but also even now as an educator, not very much has changed. And so sitting in the class doing my master's, understanding that I had been colonized and that I didn't know who I was, and that the things that were presented to me in ways that made me almost, to be very honest and transparent, made me ashamed. And so I had to leave that class at that moment and go out in the hallway. And that was the first time that I just broke and I cried. And I cried because I knew at that time that something needed to change. And the sad thing about it is, many, as you all know, because we hear about the graduation rate of racialized youth, many young people don't get that opportunity. They're not in those spaces to realize that. When I had my awakening in that space, in that university. And so I started to study more, and I started to, as we said, sort of decolonize my mind and learn more about who I was, where I come from. My parents are from Trinidad and my dad is from Jamaica, but I never really associated with Africa. It was something that even my dad being Jamaican was just like, no, we're not African. And so I had to unlearn and relearn. And it was a very hard time because I was the only one in my family sort of going through that process. And so I started to write about it. And so I decided that after, learning a lot of the beginning stuff in my master's, I decided to pursue my PhD so that I can continue the learning. And that opened up a lot more conversations for me. And when you have language, you have power. And so I started to receive, the language. I took courses with Dr. Jogi Wan. She became my supervisor. To continue taking courses with Dr. Day, just surrounded myself with, Black authors, Black scholars, Black books, everything. And it was something, because I had spent so much time in the education system in TDSB as a student and as an educator, I realized when I was equipped with the language, I realized that I wasn't crazy. That the things that I was facing, the things that I was feeling, they were real. It wasn't just me being sensitive. The things that I was facing from my colleague, conversations that were happening around me, but not with me, the silence, all of that is something that I realized that I'm going to create spaces for these conversations, not just with my colleagues, but with my students. And so my pedagogy started to change as well. And so it became a complete journey for me to write the things that I was experiencing and feeling. And so that's how my research came about. And so my method for my research, my research question was, how do diverse, self-identified Black women experience education in Canada, specifically the GTA, but I also spoke to women in Montreal and Saskatchewan. And so I interviewed 10 self-identified Black women. I did what we obviously know as an autoethnography. So I started with my own story and then emboldened it with the participants' stories of their experiences in Canadian schools. My methodology, like I said, was an autoethnography, and I used my theories, Black feminism and post-colonial theory. My main research question I shared with you, and my findings or my themes that came out from my research mostly were just defining a Black identity and the complexities of Blackness in school, I definitely talked about resistance and how we need to resist as we are in these Canadian institutions, educational institutions. I spoke about the importance of mentorship and what mentorship did for young girls that were experiencing, challenges, but also successes in the Canadian education system. And we spoke about performativity and how, as Black women, we just need to perform, or not even need to, but we're performing in order to survive. Other things that came up was spirituality, and my book basically is intertwined with all of these themes and the stories of the women that I interviewed, along with my own story, which really talked about me finding who I was throughout my teenage and young adult years, and also the challenges of really going through what I had to go through. And so I just wanted to read an excerpt from my book, if that's okay. Which is the conclusion of it, and it's the love letter to my younger self. Okay. I wish I could look into your eyes and hold both your hands as I read this to you, in order to show you that I truly understand what you are going through and that you are not alone. As you feel, there are people that love you, can support you, and guide you. Natasha, you are not alone. I am here, right here inside of you, holding you. I know things are tough. The teachers do not understand you sometimes. The kids call you names, and you don't know who to confide in, especially when your parents may not take the time to understand either. It's hard, I know. But close your eyes and breathe. Breathe deeply. You don't have to be tough right now. Don't compare yourself to others. Just breathe. Sometimes you feel really dumb, but you know that you are smart inside. You are brilliant. Keep moving forward, no matter what. Know what your beliefs are and hold on to them tightly. Don't try to be someone that you are not. Be you, be radically you, and be proud of that. Also be proud of where you come from. Be proud of the skin that you are in, no matter what people say. You may not see it right now, but you are valued, and you are in a school. So, and God, this is harder than I thought. When you feel alone, show up for yourself. Be authentically you. Your Blackness is stunning. It is everything. It envelops you like mink. Your skin shines. Feel its vibrance. Embrace it. It is royalty. Own its fierceness and allow it to bring you joy. Deep joy that no one can take from you. Learn and love. Learn at your own pace. Learn the way you know best so that you have no regrets. Learn of your people, of your intentions, and how they've contributed to the world. Learn all the time, not just in a particular month. Drink it in like water sustaining you. Let it liberate you. When you get filled, when you're filled, get up. When you drop, rise. When you feel broken, heal. You are resilient. Manifest your greatness. You are made of love. You are worthy, and you deserve love. You are brilliant like the night sky, with confidence, strut with pride. Walk down the halls of school and the streets and boardrooms and lift your head high. Be whole, love yourself. You are the queen because your ancestors are queens. God sees you, and above all, just know everything is going to be okay. That's it. Thank you so much for lifting.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, that was harder
Yes.
than I thought.
Yes. Oh, whoa.
Ah,
Yes, yes, yes. Can we just pour the love? Yes, yes, yes. I heard somebody in the chat said, my daughter need to read this. Yes, yes, yes. This is what we talk about. I feel it all in my body. Thank you so much, Natasha, for what you brought in my body tonight. That's why we said research is healing. You have seen it. When we say do the work, do the research. Don't just write the piece of paper. Anybody can write a paper, but a research that lives on. Right now, I guarantee you, there are so many more people who are going to know about your book. I've shared the link in the chat, but there are more persons who want to hear you speak. And I've watched you teach. You have taught beside me, so I know the power and the love you teach with. And I didn't understand the kind of care you had. I've watched you and the kind of care. And the students at Oisy, I could say that, loved your class. And the way you spoke to them. And I get it. I get it. You're not just doing the do. You are living the do. I love you. I respect you. I honor you. I appreciate you. And I know you're not feeling your best self tonight, but you poured into us like you'd never believe. I know I am full. And I'm sure that tons of people who are full. We're going to go right into it. I'm going to remove you from the pin. And we're going to bring in Professor Ann Lopez. Professor Ann Lopez, you're stepping in. I know I don't have to tell you. You are stepping into a space that is so, I don't know what to say. I'm just going to stop saying and just turn over to you. Professor Lopez, speak to us, take it away, talk it away, remind us how to write our story and write ourselves in our story. Professor Lopez.
All right. Oh my goodness. You have always said, Dr. Campbell, your cup is full. Boy, this is a cup filling evening. And we're all just taking it in from Dr. Monroe, Dr. Castillo, and of course, Dr. Burford. And I was just feeling you. And that is what research is all about, is how we tell our stories and how we tell the stories of others and that we research. And so grateful for this space. And thanks to everybody who is here, sharing, listening, and participating. What I'm going to share is almost sort of like a combination of everything that we've been talking about, the why we do research, the how we do research, and really to begin to see what we can do with research and how research gives us voice and all of that. And then I'm going to share something from my latest chapter in how I position my own grandmother's teachings as decolonial praxis. And we can talk a little bit about that. So I have a little bit of a, let me see if I can find my slides. Just to share, these are just to share a few ideas and thoughts. And so I wanted to talk about why, how we position all of what we've been talking about this evening, this decolonial praxis, decolonization, all of that as research. But you know, research doesn't happen by itself. We don't just get up and say, we're going to do decolonizing research and it's just something, a thing that we're going to do and be performative about. When we are talking about research that is supposed to be transformative, that brings in the voice of Black men who've been excluded, that brings in the voice of youth, that creates space for the voice of Black women, and all of the voices that have been in the margin, and engaging in this kind of research, it begins with us, who we are. I hope you're still hearing me because I think my earpiece just went out on me.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. So therefore, I think all of what we're talking about, and everybody touched on this, Dr. Castillo, Dr. Burford, and Dr. Monroe touched on this, and that was their entry point. What really brought us? What was that journey? And Dr. Castillo, I know you sort of credited Bob Marley with those words. It was Marcus Mosiah Garvey who wrote about sort of, getting from mental slavery. I have to post that every day because so many people, because we don't read the history, sort of give Bob Marley all of the credit for singing it. But I think that's an important piece. And Natasha, Dr. Burford, as she was talking about her autoethnography and her own unlearning and relearning, what Dr. Burford was capturing for us was that journey of positionality. How do we bring ourselves to do this research? How do we center it? And how do we then draw on that? So I really want to talk a little bit about how my positionality sets me up as a researcher. And because when we whether you're sort of doing masters or you're in the community or you're doing doctorate, all of us are researchers. And I like Dr. Monroe's word, all of us can co-construct theory. All of us have a role to play in this. And so when we talk about our positionality, and think about my own positionality, it's who are you? Am I? The person I am today is not the person I was when I started, for example, Teachers College in 1992. I am a whole different person in terms of my understanding. I'm a whole different person in embracing my Blackness. And what does that mean? And how I step into that, how I use it as in terms of research, how I use it in terms of my pedagogy, my curriculum, and so on. So we've got to really recognize that the work of challenging systems, of challenging ourselves, start with us. And when we talk about research, the second piece of that is, what is your lens that we're bringing to the work? Because unless Dr. Monroe brings a particular kinds of lens, she cannot do the participatory action research. Unless Dr. Campbell brings a particular kind of lens to disrupt, to go in search of different kinds of knowledge, we cannot do that kind of work. Unless Dr. Burford really was intentional in saying, I am going to use this lens, I am no longer going to foreground the Eurocentric lens, then it brings us to a different place. So when we think about our positionality, it's not our CV, it's not all of the things that we've done. It's how we foreground the different aspects of our identities and use that to inform research. And something I need to say here, not everyone that walks around with melanin actually embrace the ideas of Blackness. Not every Black person wants to be identified in terms of sort of the critical aspects of Blackness and taking that up. There are Black people who wish nothing to do with this space. So it's really, it's coming together, coming to understand what does that mean in terms of how you walk this world. Another piece of this, the lens that we look through and our positionality and who we are multiple identities. We are not just Black. We're women, we have sexual identities, religious identities, language identities. We come from different parts of the world. So those are cultural contexts. We, all kinds of things. We're made up of many different identities. So when we're thinking about our research and what we want to do, there is an intentionality around foregrounding Blackness or foregrounding other aspects of our identity, as I've said. So this is really critical. And if we have students who are listening or anybody who's thinking about, oh my goodness, I want to take up this research, I want to engage in research that's going to be transformative and to do all of these things, really there has to be a critical reflexivity work. And it's not like an event, it's a process. It's a process of unlearning, relearning, and learning again. And as Dr. Burford was said, engaging with the readings, the work of Fanon, engaging with the work of Amos Azair and Walter Rodney. When I went to the University of the West Indies, the first book I was handed to read was How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So I think this is so very important as an entry point to research. And another point before I move on as to why this is so critical, because if we have not examined who we are, and our positionality and what we bring and what we want or being to be about, we can become very performative. And as a matter of fact, hurt rather than help. And so in terms of building, I think it was Dr. Monroe who talked about building these authentic relationships, being in community. How do we have those conversations and so on? So important to think about who you are, what are the lens that you bring, and how you can use it, not in formal research, but also in informal research. So when we leave here tonight, we continue to think about how we walk in this world. And something else I'm going to say before I move on about positionality. You cannot draw on your positionality to do certain kinds of work and be silent aspects when we see oppression happening, because the oppression is connected, linked, and that is, while we're centering Blackness, it doesn't mean that we are blinded or we are unable to see the suffering of others in ways in which they're being oppressed. And when we think about our positionality, we think about our identities, we also have to think about, okay, so now that I've had this awakening, how am I going to think about whether I'm being complicit, I'm being intentional, I'm disrupting, thinking about, and how am I using that? So that's the first piece I quickly wanted to share. So the title of my presentation, and a lot of folks were talking about, was this decolonial practice or decolonization? And I think it's important for us to understand what this is, because, we're in a world now where we were decolonizing menus. We were decolonizing just about everything in sight. And oftentimes, if we're not careful with the understanding of what we're doing, as I've said, we create more harm than good. It becomes performative. It serves no purpose but to perpetuate hegemonic practices. So we must be very aware of what we mean when we're either talking about decoloniality or decolonizing the ways of doing research. So here I want to draw on the work of Fernando Marquez and Javier Daniel Merez, who talks about decolonial praxis. It is necessary to begin by acknowledging colonial oppressions that have been imposed on different groups and communities around the world and the consequences that these oppressions have caused different people in their lands. And I want to pause there. That's so critical because we cannot engage in decolonizing research, decoloniality, if we do not understand, continue to understand ways in which colonialism continues to be perpetuated in education and schooling. And that is so critical, as I've said, because if we do not understand that, if we do not have the ability to name the impact of colonial oppression, how are we going to do decolonizing work? What exactly then are we decolonizing? So I think that is so important. I want to put this in the space that we continue not to think of colonization and coloniality as something that happened in the past or that many neoliberals will have us believe. They're now trying to make us believe that slavery was not so bad. And they're trying to make us believe that we should really be grateful for the advancement of colonization. And all of us are seeing the narratives that's there. So we cannot build alternative societies for the future without naming the oppressive structures and recognizing the role that colonial and neo-colonial powers have played in the past and present. And this is what decoloniality arises from. So our entry point in this work can't be we're going to go right in and we're going to decolonize if you cannot name coloniality. So then let's take that to practice. If you're in schools and we're doing research and all of the stuff that we're doing, we cannot just go in and say that we're going to do this research on XYZ without looking at the policies and practices and policies that are going on there and seeing ways in which some of those are perpetuating harm. And so I liked what Walsh has to say that therefore the decolonial praxis begins with decoloniality. The base of decoloniality is in the understanding colonial oppressions and how they're intertwined in order to challenge them. And that's what I heard tonight. It was Dr. Castillo using images of male masculinity to challenge those dominant narratives of Black males. It was Dr. Monroe using the work and the stories of Black students to challenge the narrative about who can be a theorist, who can theorize, whose knowledge, whose experiences is worth researching. And of course, Dr. Burford really, in so many ways, brought to us the harm of colonial education that many of us experience and continue in our schools. So when we're talking about decoloniality, it must be understood that it's a process of humanization and liberation of individuals and societies. Here's why this is important. Because the work we do doesn't stay with us. The work we do has to go out to others. If it's just us and in ourselves and in our small area, we have to expand that knowledge out. And we need to understand this, learn this, be able to articulate it so when the anti woke crowd comes at us for the research that we're doing, we're able to center what is so important. We're able to push back. So that's, I quickly wanted to say that. I really think this is so important, and it's Kiana's work, and as we're putting into space different authors to read and so on, I really like this idea of the colonial matrix. And I'm just going to put it here and folks can look at it. But again, if we're going to do decolonizing work, if we're going to engage in decoloniality, we've got to understand this colonial matrix. For example, it's about power. We talk about it all the time. We have to challenge power, but how do we understand it? Whose power are we challenging? The power imposed by Western colonial empires, in which a hierarchy based on race and class dominates the institutions and perpetuated by the nation state. We all know that. Folks of all variety and stripes engage in anti Black racism. It's not limited to just one group. So we've got to understand when we're doing this work, when we're sort of engaging, disrupting, we have to name. We have to name. We also have to look for spaces where this coloniality of power perpetuates. The coloniality of knowledge. Thank you, Dr. ABC. You're disrupting the coloniality of knowledge. This is what spaces like this do, that we're disrupting the knowledge that all of us sort of got when we went to K to 12 school or in universities. The coloniality of being. There's this idea, that we dehumanize. We dehumanize a whole group of people from other spaces and call them inferior. There is no way you can say we're doing decolonizing work, decoloniality, and be okay with the dehumanization of any other group. It's not okay because it's all linked. And of course, we have to think about the environment, Mother Earth, and so on. And I will leave this diagram with you. It is so crucial if you ever get a chance to read Jairo Funes Flores' work, and he put all of that in this colonial matrix. The coloniality of knowledge, the coloniality of being, of gender. Dr. Burford was talking about that, the environment, and the coloniality of power. And why is this important? Because as we're doing our research, we're putting new forms of knowledge into space. We have to think about how is that knowledge getting out? Who is it going out to? Who is going to read it and how we're going to do that? And there's an intentionality around that. And that's why this evening is just so joyful. Is really bringing all of this into space. And just imagine Dr. Burford's book, a young Black girl reading that letter you wrote to yourself. That is knowledge creation. That's knowledge that other Black kids can get their hands on. And I want to say to you, Dr. Burford, it might not be just Black kids. It might be Asian kids. It might be South Asian kids. It might be kids who identify as LGBTQIA. It might be Indigenous kids. It might be kids from different
different aspects of their identities and their positionalities that will read your chapter. So never we believe that when we're doing this work, we're doing it for ourselves alone. It is so critical and so crucial. And so, having said that little bit then about sort of the entry point of decolonial work or decoloniality or decolonization, laying that framework of how we understand it, because the work is not random. It's not, we just don't do it by accident. We have to think about it. We have to think about how we enter. We have to think about our own positionalities, how we're implicated, all of those things. So, having said all of that, therefore, how is this understanding then of decolonial practice translated to research? And I could just end here. Maybe I should have started Dr. ABC and then everybody else would have just presented their research because really and truly they did it. They answered this question. So, so anyway. And so I'm just briefly summarizing what Dr. Burford, Dr. Castillo, and Dr. Monroe said. And by the way, I'm very intentional in calling my colleagues doctor. There's a way in which when Black people get their credentials or whatever it is, we have a way of sort of, not wanting to honor people's accomplishments. We're going to have a whole session around that. I don't know. It needs a deconstructing. But anyway, I think, it's so important. So anyway, we have to explore new approaches to research, moving beyond traditional boundaries. And boy, did we have amazing examples of that. And then I'm quickly going to share a little bit about my latest chapter in the Handbook of Decolonial Praxis, how I use my grandmother's words as decolonial theory. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm watching the time. But if you want to also read Linda Tuhewi Smith's work, she really, with Maori communities in New Zealand in 1999, she wrote that book about, I can't remember, in decolonial research methodologies, but it's so important. It is the questions that we ask, it is how we do the research. And as everybody said, it is about the why, the methodologies, the approaches, the ontology, and the epistemologies. And as Dr. Castillo was saying, his partner never looked at those stories, never asked about them, because it's so important to hold the stories that people are giving you in a particular kind of way with care. And by the way, as researchers, we're retelling other people's stories. And how we do that retelling is also very critical. And when we go into communities, and I think Dr. Monroe talked about this, how you build relationship in communities, how you enter, and so on. We all talked about the emancipatory goals, but I don't think we've talked about how we challenge the internalized, or maybe Dr. Burford, you did, those internalized dominant ideas that we were schooled in, that we have to unlearn as we're doing this work. So it is really about now going from the theory to the action, the praxis. So, in other words, and as I've said, everybody here is doing it. We have to ask questions about who are we creating knowledge for? So I do a lot of research with school leaders here in the GTA, on the continent, in Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, Jamaica. And really, the whole purpose of that is to posit into space different ideas about leadership coming from different spaces and different contexts. And then how is that created? How do you build that relationship with those you're engaging in order to co-construct this knowledge? Because it can't be just extraction. And I think Dr. Monroe talked about that. What purpose? Is the purpose of your research just to get a degree? Is the purpose of your research just to extract some knowledge? Or is the purpose of your research to have some transformative change, to empower the communities that have not been empowered? So these are questions as we leave here tonight, we continue to think about. Everybody said this. Research is not neutral. It is absolutely not neutral. And what do we mean by that? It means that our positionality, aspects of our identities are implicated in that. The way we analyze, the way we write the books, the way we talk about the research. Nobody coming here tonight is coming to think about, they're going to engage in conversations that deny that deny the importance of our African ancestral knowledge. That is not something that would happen in this space. So it is important to do that. It's also important with our research to disrupt the status quo, recognizing that research is not neutral. And so, as I really like, if you could get to read her article, Dr. Denscombe, she talks about decolonial research, therefore, needs to be understood in the context of decolonization and its historical roots. And why this is so important, because at the world that we're in right now, there are efforts with those who control power, control the aspects of knowledge, who really would want to sanitize history. They want to sanitize history. They want to have a redo at enslavement. They want to have a redo at many things. How many of us understood that there was a genocide in the Congo with King Leopold? That's never ever written in the history books. And so it requires an approach as we're engaging in this research that is transformative and not just leads to alternative ways of producing knowledge, but it's the equally to tangible outcomes that work to the advantage of oppressed groups. And this is what everybody brought to the table tonight. So I'm literally summarizing. So in many ways, the aim of decolonial research must to give voice to those who've been at the margins. And I just want to share a little bit about my latest piece, and you can read it in the Handbook of Decolonial Praxis, edited by Harold Funes Flores, where I used my grandmother's teachings in Jamaica as a form of decolonial praxis. And what I did in that piece, as you were all talking, was as I reflected on my own positionality, my own journey of learning and unlearning, and my ongoing journey, and how difficult and challenging it has been in order to literally take out colonial knowledge and logics and begin to believe in the knowledge of my ancestors and the wisdom that we got. And maybe it wasn't formal in many ways as we go to K to 12 schoolings, but how many of us in this room tonight can think of the stories of our grandmothers, of our grandfathers, of our aunties, that we never understood it when we were growing up, but that really those stories have become part of our lives and our guiding principles. So what I've done in that piece is really remove my grandmother's stories from the margins, bring it to the center, and to say, this is theory. This is knowledge. This is praxis. It might not be in academia, but in a formal way, but it belongs in the space. And that is what we do with this work. It is bringing the voices of our elders. And Dr. Castillo, you said, that Marcus Garvey talked about this, that we might be born in Trinidad, Jamaica, wherever the ship left us, but Africa is in us. And that is something as part of our positionality that is so important, but part of our history, part of our traditions that were taken away from us with that colonial education was a knowledge of our ancestors. And not to mention, of course, we don't have time here tonight to talk about the ways in which even the language our ancestors, like our grandmothers spoke, they spoke from Jamaica, Jamaican patois, and how that was not given center stage, how that was not seen as being quote unquote educated and so on. So the point that I'm trying to make here, when we're doing decolonial work and decolonial research, we have a duty. We must have a commitment to bring those forms of knowledge, and I'm even over it now calling it alternative. They're not alternative, they're central pieces of knowledge into the space to be accessed not just by ourselves but to others. And so I want to leave you with some key questions as we're thinking about research and thinking about decolonial praxis and thinking about all of those things. And before I wrap up with these key questions, in terms of the piece that I wrote about my grandmother, what I did in that piece, and as I was researching that piece, it's amazing the knowledge that came out of that. For example, around the Tainos in places like Jamaica, and how all of that. And and what happened when the enslaved met the Tainos, and all of those kinds of historical pieces that never made it into our formal education when we were getting colonial education. But it also felt, and I think all of us here tonight talked about the resistance. It talks about the honoring. It talks about the joy, the healing that comes from doing this kind of work. So as we wrap up, I just want you to think about how you position yourself in your research. And when I say research, it's not just research done at the university or in formal settings, but in your everyday life as you go about in search of other knowledge. We must go in search of other knowledge. I went in search of my grandmother's stories and wisdom and putting a voice to it and putting in it. So as you leave here tonight, no matter where you are, how are you thinking of how you're being spaced? What is it that you need to do to learn, unlearn, to engage? How are you thinking about your own positionalities, your vulnerable spots? How are you walking in your blackness or your Asianness or your whatever aspects of your identity? How do you enter spaces to conduct research? We'll have to have a whole other session to talk about how Dr. Castillo engaged with his participants, how Dr. Burford engaged with those other Black women, how Dr. Monroe engaged with her students. What does that look like? How do you build those relationships? What are our commitments? And the last piece I want to say to you, knowledge that's generated and stays on your desk is inert knowledge. If only you're the only person reading it, well, you're feeling good about it, but but you have to get that knowledge out. So let us give Dr. Burford and others who are publishing and making podcasts and books and things, let's show them some love, because that is the way we generate the knowledge, and that is the purpose. We share it with community, we share it in spaces that we need to disrupt, and that is so very important. So I want to thank you. And any questions, go find the chapter. It's a Routledge, it's a Routledge handbook, and you'll find the chapter on my grandmother there. And you have 7 minutes, Dr. Campbell. I'll yield back.
Thank you so much. Come on, put your hands together for Professor Lopez. Wow. Wow, 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 community. Thank you. I have to say something quickly. When I do a lot of workshops and talks, and I would say to people, the reason why I know so much is because I am a better student than I am a teacher. And anybody who have taught me can tell you, I'm a good student. I mean, I talk a lot in class, and I give trouble, and I eat at the back of the class. I'm that person. I've always get in trouble for eating snack in the class or something. Like, that's just me. But I'm a good student. I show up at school, I take my notes. And I said it's for a reason. Tonight, I may be the director of this, well, I am the director of the center, and I'm hosting this. But I can tell you, I am so empowered, you have no idea. I am working on my own work about self-decolonization. Every word, Professor Lopez, the things you had to say, Natasha, some of the ways in which you articulate the framing and the phrasing, Tanitia, Dr. Monroe, some of the way you talk about the research and self-care and well-being and mental health and care, Dr. John, right? Like, this is what we're talking about. But something that went through every one of you, and I hope all my doctoral and my master's students, you heard that. It's about being authentic and pulling up your chair in an authentic way. I know the school seems to want to rush us to just write something and get a grade and go. But I'm going to be very frank, and I'm doing this for the recording. I know many people who have done it, get the grade and go, and then they are stuck. And when they're stuck, I realize these are the people who just wanted the grade, wanted the title, and then they go. What are you going to do with it afterwards? Because research that is not living is like whatever. For Tanitia, Dr. Monroe, if you have a link, please put in the chat about November the 1st. What's going to happen November the 1st with these young people? It's there, it's advertised. If you're a community, you can get to attend this event to see what research, when it's alive. When it's alive. You know, every time I listen to you, Professor Ann Lopez, I learn something. I learn something. And the way you even center those questions, what are you doing with it, is important. So I just want to say, what an evening. I see our advisory committee members. Thank you so much. I see international guests. I see professors, past Isaac graduates who are now professors at other universities. I see you. I see past grad students. I see you. I see you. I see the MT year 2 students. I see you. I see you, Helen. Ellen, one of our OISE, in a part of our OISE leadership. I see you. Thank you so much for being here. I see you, Professor Linda Efenu. I talked about you earlier. One of the pioneer of this series, a powerful series that is online. This recording will be on our website tomorrow. Go back to it, because I have to go back to it, because I need to cite some of you, and I need the juice to put in some work I am doing on self-decolonization. So hint, I have to go back to it. The story you told, Natasha, that letter needs to be in your PowerPoint, young teachers who are in the room talking. That is a letter you read, not just any old time. You find the right time to read a letter like that, because a letter like that cannot be read just like any old time. That's you learn how to craft, how to enter space. And the last thing I want to say is something you said, Dr. Professor Lopez. I'm going to have to put a note on that, because I don't know if you're going to do it this December or you're doing it next year or whenever you're doing it, because you're always doing the do, which I respect and honor you for that, because you show up in your fullness. But talking to our researchers about how we enter the space, how we connect to our participant, is something I think needs to have a discussion more at OISE. And I'm going to be very clear on that. The idea to always say, do you know someone? I get snowball sampling, but a lot of us, we just snowball sample and then there's no connection to the people who are asking these powerful questions. Your sampling needs to be very intentional. You have to put work into find if Dr. Bruford just asks just anybody in a certain way, she wouldn't have gotten the stories, the powerful stories, because many persons have yet to learn how to tell the story. And that's what we're doing. We're teaching them that. And so it's a process. I just want to say thank you to everyone. I'm going to get that grandmother's view, that grandmother's view, Professor Lopez, because I'm writing about ethnography myself and telling my story, and I will take guidance from your writing about how to craft that story, because just writing it is not it. Crafting it, the language I'm going to use, the phrasing and the framing is important. What a night! What a night! All this night needs is some food, but I have my leftovers from Thanksgiving. My own Thanksgiving yesterday. I steamed some good Jamaican snapper, and I steamed 2, and I have the second one there to go eat. So I'm going to bid you all good night. What a night. Are you full? I see you. Is it Elvinia? Elvinia? Are you full? I could see that. You drink up a lot tonight. You drink up. I see you drinking. I was like, oh, is she? She's drinking up a lot.
Yes,
I love that.
I'm very grateful. I'm in Vancouver right now, and we don't have a lot of this in Vancouver. So whenever I get the opportunity, I fill my stomach to the brim.
I see you drinking. I see. I see you, Carla. I see you. I see you. I see you. Sophia, I guess you're the youngest person in the room and one of the power voices tonight. You better live your best speaking life. You better listen, when I come to wherever you speak, years from now, I'm in the audience. You're going to see me waving. You're going to see me wave, because that's me. Or I bring the chair. I bring the pom-poms. I see you, Damian Bell. I see you, community. I see you. I see you. I see you, Althea. I see you, powerful Black woman who does that amazing work. I see you, Professor Kurt Henry from there in Jamaica and the center. The amazing work that you are doing. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Enough love, enough love, enough love. You fill my cup. What a job to have, right? What a job. They pay me for this. Imagine. Love you all. Have a beautiful night. Enough love, enough love, enough love. Good night, everyone.